Hello, how's it going? Gennaro Washington here, CEO of Cortex Solutions. And again, I bring you ACSMI. We're going to be talking about the history of cybersecurity. Why is it important to know the history? Well, if we know the history of cybersecurity and we know what's happened, we can best suit ourselves for a future where it's not so bleak. We know that history tends to repeat itself. So if we know what has happened in the past, we can better prep ourselves for what may happen in the future, especially with all the new evolving technology that's coming. It's here now, okay? So what we want to do is best position ourselves. Let's start with cybersecurity. Now, this is a very, very interesting tale of innovation. And we'll talk about the beginning stages. What I mean by this is, think about how cybersecurity came to be. With IT and the world of technology, it pretty much started out as saying, well, we want functionality. We want to connect with other people within the world, globally, from different locations. And we want to be able to do so in a structured way, in a somewhat fast way, especially if you're starting early. It wasn't that fast. But let's talk about from the early vulnerabilities of our primitive computer systems, and now how sophisticated everything has become due to the sole fact that, yes, we are always evolving. There are always new attacks. There are always new threats, and then ways for us to counteract that or put into place safe measures that's going to allow us to ensure that, yes, there are evolving threats. Yes, there is emerging technology, but we can do something a little bit better. We can understand where we're at versus where we're trying to go and be able to really and truly make a difference or a change just by knowing what has happened in the past. So let's talk about the early days of computing and the first cyber threats. So in the 1960s and 70s, this marked the absolute dawn of remote computing. The first recorded cyber threat was known as the creeper virus in 1971. Now, if you understand the history of the internet, we're going to start to talk about ARPANET. This was before the internet, though. And one of the main things, it wasn't even really malicious in a sense, but we were able to display a message that says, "I'm the creeper, catch me if you can." Now, early hacks exploited system oversights, even in primitive technology. So some of the insights that we gathered within the era was, well, it's important for us to understand that cybersecurity itself is not just about advanced threats. Now, simple mistakes can lead to vulnerabilities, which is how this all became to be in the first place, because it wasn't necessarily meant to be malicious. It was accidental. But this is around the time the first vulnerabilities begin to surface. And we have a timeline here. The birth of the first cybersecurity threat early on. And we'll kind of go from there and we'll look at, well, what has happened since then. The birth of malware, viruses and worms. Now, by the 1980s, the first malicious programs emerged. The Morse worm came to be around 1988. Now, this was one of the first ones that gained some actual traction. Why? Because it infected nearly 10% of the internet connected computers. How crazy is that? That is a lot in that time. Maybe not a lot now if you really think about it, but you know. Now, this prompted the use of CERTs, or incident response teams. Now, commercial antivirus software such as McAfee started to come online at that time because we really needed a way to combat these threats. That's the way I look at it. It's a way for us to say, okay, well, we know that something like this exists. Now let's try to combat it. We just talked about that, where there's going to be some emerging threat, but we also have to have emerging technology that's going to combat some of these malware threats. So some insights to this. Our early malware, it really highlighted the need to be proactive with this, not necessarily being reactive, but at least understanding that, hey, something like this exists. We should probably look into this. We should probably go a little bit more in depth on understanding how we can defend against some of these intrusions. The rise of the actual hacking culture began late 1980s. Now, this gave birth to the Legion of Doom, Masters of Deception. Now, this emerged and really kind of got the look at cybersecurity in a way where it wasn't necessarily a good light. Hence the rise of hacking culture. Now, what we also saw the birth of is the rise of ethical hacking. It's opposite. Whereas the Legion of Doom or the Masters of Deception, they were all about, how can I create mischief? How can I create some form of espionage? Sneaky stuff, okay? But for us, on the ethical hacking side, we want to use those skills to defend. We want to use those skills to become aware and let organizations know, hey, this is what we are vulnerable to and this is how we can remediate that. A few insights are hackers' activities, they accelerated the legislation reforms. Why? Well, because things are starting to happen. Things are starting to pick up pace. We just saw Morrisworm come to be. Now we have hacking. Whoa, what is going on? Right? So the government enacted the CFAA back in 1986, right, to criminalize pretty much anyone that's going to be conducting any unauthorized computer activities. You can think back to that CIA triad, the confidentiality, right? You're trying to access a system where you don't necessarily have the rights to do so. So let's talk about some of the evolution of cybersecurity technologies. Firewalls. And we talked about what a firewall is. It's all about saying, hey, yes, you can come into this network, or no, you can't come into this network based on ACLs, based on content. If it's an application firewall or a web application firewall, it's going to have different criteria. But again, we're starting at just what a firewall is. And these emerged in the 1990s. This was one of the first line of defense where it provided access control, ACLs, or access control as far as like the family under NIST. Now, IDSs, as we talked about before with our cop analogy. Now, this is all about developing ways to monitor systems for specific but suspicious activities. Because I say specific, just like a antivirus solution, you can have virus signatures. Right? So keep that in mind. Malware is a little bit different. It's polymorphic. It can change. It can do behavioral, heuristic. So it's a little bit different. But the advancements within technology has forced us in a way to come up with cryptography. Right? It made sensitive communication a lot more secure. So protocols such as SSL were introduced back in 1995. Now, so we use TLS, right? Version 1.2 and on up. Now, a lot of the technologies laid the groundwork for our modern cybersecurity tools, but we have to start somewhere. And striking the balance in between, well, prevention, detection, and response has been one of our key aspects of creating these certain types of tools. So as you can see, it's a progression. It's a progression from where we were to where we're trying to get to, which is a top secure state within our cybersecurity posture. So the rise of the cybercrime and cyber terrorism, that just kind of fueled the fire for us. A lot of the organized crime and state-sponsored actors back in the 2000s, such as CryptoLocker or ransomware attacks in general, this targeted individuals and organizations that are extracting huge financial gains. What I mean by that is they will encrypt your data and expect you to pay a lot of money, a lot of times. So terrorist organizations, they begin employing these certain type of tactics to disrupt the critical infrastructure, to spread propaganda. We don't want that. We want to be on the other side of things where we're defending against that. Now, cyber threats became more scalable. Adversaries became more evolved. They were not just labeled as script kiddies anymore. Now we have actual groups that are doing certain things, very nefarious things that should be stopped. So this is an evolution. Remember, this is all about escalating what has happened and being aware, because once we're aware, we can actually take some time to put into awareness training, put into defending, put into a lot of hands-on training as well too. Now, the early 2000s witnessed breaches like TJ Maxx, Edward Snowden revelations, and then the GDPR. It helped reshape the global approach to cybersecurity and personal data. We talked about this last time. But one of the major incidents is driven innovations into cyber policies, because we have to figure out a way to stop this from an administrative standpoint as well. We're talking about policies. Now think about it like this. There's always going to be some data breach. There's always going to be an organization being hacked, individuals being hacked, of course. We don't want that, but it happens. So it's important for us to understand, well, certain events have had to happen for us to get to where we're trying to get to. That's as simple as that. So what do you need to do? What can you do in this moment? Well, you can start prepping your own self for your certifications. You can look into the CEH and the CISSP. These are all skills that are needed to showcase what you know how to do. From the theory side, I always recommend doing your hands-on as well. Now, professionals, we seek to showcase what we know. So an approach that we're utilizing, say, hey, I have read, I've studied, I've done all the things I need to do. Here's my certification. It's going to show and test to say, hey, this person knows what they're doing. Specialized skills. Not a lot of people can gain these certifications, so start early, start now. So modern cybersecurity challenges in the future of cybersecurity is this. Today's threats, we have deepfakes. I mentioned APTs earlier, now AI-powered attacks. Collaboration between our governments and businesses and individuals, this is critical, integral even, to securing the digital space. So emerging trends call for zero trust models now. You don't want to trust anything on the internet. You never know. Always look at input as user or data input or user input as malicious because we just don't know. Trust but verify. And even then, verify again. So AI-enhanced defenses have been the more need, and quantum-resistant cryptography, these are just emerging trends. If we want to defend against what we've dealt with in the past, we have to know what's coming in the future, and that's what we're talking about with emerging trends. Continuous monitoring and learning how to be adaptable, this is what's going to help you shape yourself, mold yourself to be the professional of tomorrow. The role of a cyber framework, and we touched on this last time, but NIST was introduced in 2014. Now we have NIST CSF 2.0. This provides guidance and structure within our special publications to understand, oh, wow, this is what I have to do. This is a guide that I can utilize. So they prioritize being adaptable, ensuring that organizations can secure their systems, but also be meeting the evolving threats. Let's go through a real-world example. When we talked about the creeper virus, we talked about the Morse worm, let's talk about ransomware. Real-world example was, well, in Germany, one day, there was a ransomware attack. And this ransomware attack, of course, is going to attack the critical systems. It was a hospital at the time. All their systems were encrypted, which means that the patients were not able to get the care that they needed. Unfortunately, there were a lot of critical systems that needed, or patients that needed some of the critical systems that were in place. Unfortunately, a patient passed away due to that in transit to another hospital because they could not access the systems without paying that insanely amount of a ransom. But what we can do is we can learn how to implement recovery techniques such as backups and endpoint protection. And then patching for vulnerabilities. This prevents ransomware from crippling the actual system. Think of it like this. Vulnerabilities are always going to be exploited if that vulnerability exists. If it doesn't exist, then how can it be exploited? Now, you have 0 days, but just keep in terms of that. If we're patching and we're doing our best practices, well, hey, we're doing what we can. So I always recommend studying up on different case studies within ransomware and then experiment with some of the anti-ransomware tools to understand how to prevent this. And then you want to run simulated attacks within Try Hack Me or Hack the Box. This is just to gain some awareness around it, to gain hands-on experience around it. That's one of the main ways that you can do, at least right now, prepping for your certification, understanding where we were versus where we're trying to get to, and then just doing some research on some case studies. This will best help prep you for the road ahead. Again, it's been great. This is Gennaro Washington here, CEO of Cortex Solutions, and you have now been educated on the history of cybersecurity, brought to you by ACSMI. Thank you.